She was just another detail in his life, until one night, one dress, and all eyes changed everything. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post daily. Continuing. Marina Sterling looked at her reflection in the closet mirror and didn't recognize the woman she saw there. At 28, she should have been in the prime of her life, but she felt like a shadow wandering through the marble corridors of the penthouse in Greenwich Village. The 1,000-square-meter apartment with panoramic views of New York City was a gilded cage where she had become invisible to her own husband. 4 years of marriage to Robert Maxwell Armstrong, one of the country's most powerful businessmen, and she had transformed into just another expensive accessory in his impeccably organized life. Robert commanded an empire of construction and investment firms that moved billions, but he had forgotten how to talk to his own wife. Marina remembered when he looked at her as if she were the center of the universe, when their laughter filled the rooms, and he cancelled meetings just to spend more time by her side. Now mornings began with Robert already in the office, leaving only the aroma of gourmet coffee and the distant sound of the driver starting the car. He returned late, dined in silence while checking emails on his phone, and slept on the opposite side of the king-size bed. Marina had tried numerous times to strike up a conversation, to talk about the books she was reading, about the art classes she attended at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, about the social projects she wanted to support. She always received the same vague look and a mechanical, "That's nice, darling," followed by an excuse about an urgent call. Wedding anniversaries turned into formal dinners at expensive restaurants where Robert greeted acquaintances and talked business while she smiled politely. The last one had been at 11 Madison Park, and Marina spent 2 hours listening to Robert discuss mergers and acquisitions with other businessmen who approached their table. When they returned home, he went straight to the office to handle some loose ends, and she slept alone, hugging her pillow, wondering when she had become so insignificant. The last straw had been the previous week. Marina organized a surprise birthday party for Robert, invited their closest friends, and prepared everything down to the smallest detail. He arrived 3 hours late, quickly greeted a few guests, whispered a cold thank you in her ear, and spent the rest of the night on the phone. When the last guests left, embarrassed, Marina burst into tears in the ensuite bathroom. Robert knocked on the door, asked if she was okay, and when she didn't answer, he simply went to sleep. That Saturday morning, while Robert was once again at the office dealing with an emergency, Marina decided that something needed to change. She didn't know exactly what yet, but she couldn't bear feeling like a ghost in her own life anymore. The invitation to the launch party for the new Maxwell & Associates corporate tower had been on the dresser for a week. Robert hadn't even asked if she'd like to go, merely commenting casually that it would be another boring work event. Marina picked up the golden invitation and read it again. Launch cocktail, Maxwell Bondi Tower. Dress code, gala. The event would be held at the Grand Bondi Hotel in Sydney, Australia. Robert had mentioned that several international investors would be present, in addition to the Australian business elite. An idea began to form in Marina's mind. If Robert wanted to treat her like furniture, perhaps it was time to show him what he was missing out on. She spent the rest of Saturday browsing the most exclusive boutiques on the Upper East Side. In a discreet shop on Fifth Avenue, she found exactly what she was looking for. A pure silk red dress designed by an emerging American stylist. The neckline was daring without being vulgar, the fabric hugged every curve of her body, and the intense red color accentuated her olive skin and brown hair, which she decided to leave loose in natural waves that cascaded over her shoulders. The saleswoman, an elegant woman in her 50s, smiled when Marina emerged from the fitting room. "That dress was made for you. It's going to make quite an impact." "That's exactly what I want," Marina replied, surprising herself with the determination in her own voice. She also bought gold high-heeled sandals and a small clutch of the same color. She had spent more money in a single day than she normally would in 3 months, but for some reason she didn't care. Robert always told her to buy whatever she wanted. That money was no object. Now she would do exactly that. During the flight to Sydney on Monday afternoon, Robert barely looked up from his laptop. Marina tried to talk about the view of Sydney Harbour, but he just mumbled something about tight schedules and went back to typing furiously. She looked out the private jet window and wondered when she had stopped fighting for his attention. At the hotel, they occupied the presidential suite, with a view of Bondi Beach. Robert went straight to the bathroom to shower and get ready, while Marina sat on the balcony watching. The waves break on the sand. The sunset painted the sky with golden and orange hues, but the beauty of the scene couldn't erase the loneliness she felt. "I'm going downstairs to greet some guests before the official event starts," Robert called from the room, already adjusting his tie. "You can come down when you're ready." Marina heard the door close and sighed. Even in moments that should have been intimate, like getting ready together for a party, Robert found a way to maintain distance. She looked at the red dress hanging in the suite's closet and felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. It took her almost 2 hours to get ready. Every detail was carefully considered. Her makeup enhanced her dark eyes with a subtle, smoky eye. Her lips were the same red tone as the dress, and she had pulled part of her hair into a low bun, leaving a few loose strands that framed her face. The perfume, a Chanel that Robert had given her for their first wedding anniversary, but which she rarely wore, was spritzed on her wrists and behind her ears. When she looked in the mirror one last time before leaving, Marina saw a woman she had forgotten existed. Elegant, sensual, powerful. For a moment she remembered who she was before she got married. The investigative journalist who wasn't afraid to confront corrupt politicians. The woman Robert had pursued for months until he secured a first date. The main ballroom of the Grand Bondi Hotel was packed when Marina descended. More than 300 people circulated among elegantly decorated tables. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and uniformed waiters served Dom Perignon champagne and sophisticated canapés. Marina paused at the top of the staircase leading to the ballroom, and for a moment hesitated. That's when Robert saw her. He was talking to a group of Japanese investors when his gaze casually drifted to the staircase. The champagne glass almost slipped from his hand. Robert knew every inch of his wife's body, but at that moment it was as if he was seeing a completely different woman. The red dress seemed to have been painted on Marina's skin, and the way she descended the stairs, with a confidence he hadn't seen in years, made all the conversations around him fade into a distant murmur. Marina crossed the ballroom, greeting acquaintances, and Robert watched, mesmerized, as all male eyes turned to her. The managing partner of an American bank interrupted his own conversation to watch Marina pass. The son of an influential politician, known for romantic scandals, whispered something to a friend as he followed her with his eyes. Even some of the older guests, accustomed to all sorts of beautiful women at high society events, subtly turned their heads as she walked by. "Your wife looks stunning tonight, Robert," commented Mr. Nakamura, the main Japanese investor, with a smile that Robert couldn't tell if it was respectful or overly interested. "She's always been beautiful," Robert replied dryly, but his voice sounded more tense than he intended. For the next hour, Robert tried to focus on business conversations, but his eyes constantly searched for Marina. She was radiant, conversing animatedly with the American consul's wife about a contemporary art project, laughing genuinely for the first time in months. An Argentinian businessman approached the group and was introduced to Marina, who extended her hand politely. The man held her hand a few seconds longer than necessary and made some comment that provoked another laugh. Robert felt something burn in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in so long that he almost didn't recognize it. Jealousy. Pure, primitive, irrational jealousy. The same feeling he had felt in the first months of their courtship, when he still had to win Marina over and compete with other men for her attention. "Robert, are you listening to me?" Mr. Nakamura asked, lightly touching his arm. "Sorry, I was just checking if everything was in order," Robert lied, forcing his attention back to the conversation about investments in the American real estate market. But it was impossible to concentrate. Marina had moved closer to the bar and was now talking to Daniel Foster, heir to a family of New York coffee growers and known for his irresistible charm. Daniel was clearly impressed, leaning in to hear better what Marina was saying. His laughs were too loud, and the way he looked at her made Robert involuntarily clench his fists. "Marina has always been a fascinating woman," commented a voice behind him. Robert turned and found Sophia March, a former model and wife of an Italian magnate. You two were always an enviable couple. So much chemistry, so much complicity. Robert looked at Sophia without fully understanding what she was implying. But there was something in the woman's tone that bothered him. Was the lack of chemistry between him and Marina so evident that even strangers noticed? At that moment, Marina burst out laughing at something Daniel said, and her laughter echoed through the ballroom in a way Robert hadn't heard in months. It was a true, spontaneous laugh, the kind she used to let out when they were alone in the early days of their relationship. The realization that another man had managed to elicit that reaction from her when he himself couldn't even maintain a 5-minute conversation with his own wife was like a punch to the gut. Robert excused himself from the group of investors and walked towards the bar, trying to appear casual. As he approached, he heard Marina telling Daniel about her time as a journalist, when she covered corruption in the mayor's office of a small upstate New York town. "Wow, you actually infiltrated the scheme. That's dangerous and impressive at the same time," Daniel said, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "It was one of the most important stories I did. I uncovered a $5 million fraud in phantom public works. The mayor ended up in jail." Robert stopped a few steps away. He had completely forgotten about that phase of Marina's life. In fact, he had forgotten many things about the woman he married. When was the last time he had asked about her projects, her dreams, her ambitions? When was the last time he had truly paid attention to what she had to say? "Robert." Marina saw him approach, and her smile slightly faded. "Daniel, this is my husband, Robert Maxwell Armstrong." The two men greeted each other with overly firm handshakes and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Your wife was just telling me about her brilliant career in investigative journalism. It's impressive how she managed to expose that corruption scheme," Daniel said, still with evident admiration. "Yes, Marina has always been very determined," Robert replied, and immediately realized how his response sounded lukewarm, almost condescending. The contrast with Daniel's enthusiasm was stark. "Determined is an understatement. She's a hero. I can only imagine the fascinating stories you must have to tell," Daniel continued, addressing Marina again and completely ignoring Robert. "Some you wouldn't believe," Marina replied, and Robert noticed she avoided his gaze. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Daniel asking intelligent questions about Marina's work and showing a genuine interest that made Robert feel increasingly uncomfortable. It wasn't just jealousy, though that was certainly present. It was the painful realization that a stranger was getting to know his wife better in 20 minutes than he had in the last few months. When Daniel finally said goodbye to greet other guests, Robert and Marina were alone for the first time that night. "You look beautiful," he said, finally looking directly at her. "Thank you," Marina replied, but there was a coldness in her voice that Robert couldn't decipher. "Is that dress new? I bought it on Saturday." Robert wanted to say something else, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. How was it possible that talking to his own wife had become so difficult? They stood in awkward silence until the master of ceremonies announced dinner. During dinner, they sat at the main table with other important couples. Marina was next to a French diplomat who spoke fluent English and seemed enchanted by her intelligence and charm. Robert, across the table, watched every interaction, every smile she directed at the man, every animated gesture she made as they spoke about contemporary American art. The businessman sitting next to Robert, noticing his distraction, commented in a low voice, "Your wife is truly special, intelligent, beautiful, elegant. You're lucky." "I am," Robert replied mechanically, but for the first time in years, he was questioning whether he truly deserved that luck. When the orchestra began to play and a few couples headed to the dance floor, Robert stood up and extended his hand to Marina. "Shall we dance?" Marina hesitated for a moment but accepted. On the floor, Robert pulled her close, feeling the perfume he hadn't smelled in months, the warmth of her body against his. For a few minutes they danced in silence, and Robert vaguely remembered how they used to dance in her apartment on lazy weekends in the early years of their relationship. "Marina," he began, his voice hoarse. "What?" "You're different tonight. Marina looked him directly in the eyes for the first time that night. Different how? More present. More yourself. It was a strange answer, and Robert realized it the moment the words left his mouth. Marina stopped dancing. More myself? She repeated, and there was something dangerous in her voice. And how was I before, Robert? Less myself? Robert realized he had stepped on a landmine, but he didn't know how to retreat. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Other people on the dance floor began to look discreetly at them. Marina pulled away from Robert and walked back to the table. He followed her, feeling that something fundamental had changed, but without fully understanding what. The rest of the night passed in palpable tension. Marina continued talking with other guests but avoided Robert. He stayed watching, feeling like a stranger in his own life, seeing his wife shine for everyone but him. When they finally returned to the suite, it was past midnight. The silence in the elevator was suffocating. Marina took off her shoes as soon as they entered the room and went straight to the bathroom, without a word. Robert sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sound of the shower water, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly think about their marriage. When had he stopped paying attention to Marina? When had she become just another part of his routine, like brushing his teeth or checking emails? The truth was painful but inescapable. He had treated his own wife as he treated everything else in his life, as something he owned and controlled, that would always be there when he needed it, that didn't require special maintenance or attention. He had given Marina money, luxury, social status, but he had forgotten to give her the only thing that truly mattered, himself. When Marina emerged from the bathroom, wearing a hotel robe, Robert was still sitting in the same position. Marina, we need to talk. Now? She asked, tired. About what? Happened tonight. About us. Marina looked at him for a long moment, and Robert saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. Deep sadness, but also a determination that frightened him. Robert, she said, her voice firmer than he expected, tonight was the first time in months that I felt seen. Not by you, but by other people. You want to know why I'm different? Because I remembered who I am when I'm not invisible. Marina's words struck Robert like lightning. Invisible. That was exactly what he had made her. The extraordinary woman he had. Married had become invisible to him, and he hadn't even realized it. Robert remained silent, absorbing Marina's words. Invisible. The most important woman in his life had become invisible to him, and the realization was devastating. He opened his mouth to respond, but Marina raised her hand, signaling that she wasn't finished. Do you want to know when was the last time you asked me how my day was? When was the last time you turned off your phone during a conversation with me? When was the last time you truly listened to me? Marina's voice trembled, but she continued. I'll tell you when it was, Robert. It was over a year ago, on our trip to the Hamptons, when you could still go 2 hours without checking emails. Robert vaguely remembered that trip. It had been a long weekend, and he had promised Marina it would be just the two of them, no work. But even then, he had spent most of the time preoccupied with an acquisition he was negotiating. Marina, I know I've been working a lot, but... Working a lot? She interrupted him, and for the first time in years there was fury in her voice. Robert, you don't work a lot. You run away. You run away from me. You run away from us. You run away from everything that isn't profit and spreadsheets and meetings. Robert stood up abruptly. I run away. I built an empire for us. Everything you have, everything you wear, everything in this luxurious life we lead exists because I work 16 hours a day. I didn't ask for an empire, Marina shouted, and Robert realized it was the first time in 4 years of marriage he had heard her yell. I asked for a husband. I asked for a partner. I asked for someone who would come home and ask how my day was without their eyes glued to their phone. Marina's words echoed through the luxurious suite, and Robert felt as if he had been slapped. He had spent years building justifications for his absences, for his coldness, for his emotional distance. Work was important, business was complex. He was securing their future. But at that moment, before the woman he loved, and whom he had forgotten how to show love, all those justifications crumbled like a house of cards. Do you know the saddest part of all this, Robert? Marina continued, tears finally streaming down her face. It's that I fell in love with a man who saw me, who listened to me, who cancelled meetings to take me to dinner at simple places, who stayed up late talking about my dreams. And now I live with a stranger who treats me like part of the decor. Robert felt his chest tighten. He remembered the man Marina described, the man he had been in the first years of their relationship, when he still had to win her over every day, when he still felt he could lose her if he didn't try hard enough. When had he stopped trying? When had he started taking Marina for granted? Do you want to know why I wore this dress tonight? Marina asked, gesturing to the red garment hanging on the chair. Because I wanted to remember what it feels like to be seen. I wanted to remember what it feels like to talk to someone who is interested in what I have to say. And you know what I discovered? I discovered that I still exist, that I still have interesting things to say. I can still make people laugh. I can still be attractive. The last word came out with a bitterness that made Robert realize how deeply he had wounded his wife's self-esteem. Marina had dressed to attract attention, yes, but not out of vanity or caprice. She had dressed to remind herself that she was a desirable, interesting, alive woman, things he had failed to make her feel for a very long time. I still find you attractive, Robert said, his voice hoarse. Marina laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless laugh. Robert, you've barely touched me in months. When was the last time we made love? And I'm not talking about those quick late-night encounters when you come home after midnight and want sex without conversation, without foreplay, without connection. When was the last time you touched me because you wanted to be with me, not just because you had a physical need? Robert opened his mouth but realized he didn't know the answer. Their intimacies had become mechanical, functional, almost always initiated by him in the rare moments when he wasn't exhausted or preoccupied with some business matter. And when they finished, he usually picked up his phone to check messages, or simply turned over and went to sleep. I don't know when all this started, he admitted, sinking heavily into the armchair by the window. It wasn't intentional, Marina. I never wanted you to feel invisible. But I do, she replied, wiping away tears. And the worst part is that I let it happen. I stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine, adapting my life to your impossible schedule, shrinking my dreams to fit into the space you left for me. I stopped having an opinion about where to eat because you were always busy. I stopped telling you about my projects because you were always in a hurry. I stopped being myself because the real Marina bothered your agenda. Robert stood up and walked to Marina, reaching out to touch her face. She pulled away. No, she said firmly. Don't do that now. Don't try to comfort me because you're feeling guilty. I needed to say these things a long time ago, and now that I've started, I'm going to finish. Robert lowered his hand, respecting her space, but remained standing nearby. Tonight, when those men talked to me, when they showed genuine interest in what I had to say, I remembered what it feels like to be valued, and I realized that it's not too much to ask for that from my own husband. It's not too much to ask to be a priority in the life of the person who swore to love me in joy and sorrow. You are my priority, Robert protested. No, Robert, I am an obligation, a responsibility, a trophy wife you take to social events and then forget exists. Do you love me? Maybe. But you don't value me. You don't prioritize me. You don't see me. Marina's words were like shards of glass cutting through the justifications Robert had built for years. He had always told himself that he worked so hard to give her the life she deserved, that he was building a future for the two of them, that he was being a good provider. But he had utterly failed to be a good companion. What do you want me to do? He asked, and there was a desperation in his voice that surprised both of them. I want you to want to change, not because I'm threatening to leave, not because you're afraid of losing your assets in a separation, but because you miss me. Because you want to be my husband for real, not just my rich roommate. Robert remained silent for a long moment. The truth was he had forgotten how to miss Marina, because she was always there, available, waiting. He had forgotten how to court her because he had assumed he had won her forever. He had forgotten how to actively love her because he had confused love with habit. I miss you, he said finally. Even with you here, I miss the woman you were, the woman we were together. Marina looked at him, with an expression Robert couldn't quite decipher. There was sadness, but also something that might have been hope. Then help me understand, Robert. Why did we stop talking? Why did you stop touching me affectionately? Why did you stop laughing at my jokes? Why did I become invisible to you? Robert sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. I don't know. I guess I lost my way. The business started growing very fast after we got married. Responsibilities increased, pressure increased, and I started prioritizing work because it was easier. At work, I know what to do. I know how to solve problems, how to make decisions, how to control results. At home, with you, I started to feel lost. Lost how? You're very smart, Marina. Much more cultured than I am, more sensitive, more interesting. In the beginning of our relationship, that fascinated me. But later it started to intimidate me. I started to be afraid of disappointing you, of not being interesting enough, deep enough. It was easier to stay in the office, where I knew I was competent, than to come home and feel inadequate. Marina looked at him, in surprise. Inadequate? Robert, you think you feel inadequate with me? You read books I've never read. You have opinions about art I've never understood. You talk about philosophy and politics in a way that makes me realize how shallow I am. When we met, you were a respected journalist. You investigated corruption. You made a difference in the world. I just move money from one place to another. Robert, Marina sat beside him on the bed, maintaining some distance, but clearly touched by his vulnerability. Do you really believe that? It's not a matter of believing, it's what I see when I compare myself to you. Marina remained silent for a few minutes, processing the revelation. All these months she had felt inadequate. Robert also felt inadequate. The difference was that he had taken refuge in work, while she had diminished herself to try to fit into the space he left available. Robert, when I fell in love with you, it wasn't for your money or your status. It was for the man who stayed up late asking me questions about my stories, who wanted to understand how I discovered information, who was genuinely interested in my work. It was for the man who took me to dinner at a diner in Chinatown because he wanted to try Japanese food for the first time. It was for the man who admitted he didn't understand art, but who spent hours at MoMA with me because he knew I loved it. Robert looked at her, surprised. You remember that? I remember everything, Robert. I remember the man I met, the man I fell in love with. And that man wasn't inadequate. He was curious, he was present, he was real. Where did I lose that man? I don't think you lost him. I think you buried him under a pile of spreadsheets and meetings because you believed that being successful was more important than being happy, that being rich was more important than being loved. Robert felt a pressure in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It was as if an armor he had built around himself was cracking, allowing long-suppressed feelings to surface. I want that man back, he said, his voice almost a whisper. But I don't know how. Neither do I, Marina replied honestly, but I know I can't continue living as your invisible roommate. Either. You really want to try to rebuild our marriage, or what? Marina looked him directly in the eyes. Or we end it, for real. Because I deserve more than this, Robert. I deserve to be loved, to be seen, to be valued. And if you can't give me that, I will find someone who can. Marina's words hit Robert like a lightning bolt. The possibility of losing her, which had seemed so distant and improbable for years, suddenly became real and imminent. He imagined Marina falling in love with another man, laughing with another man the way she had laughed with Daniel at the party, being seen and valued by someone who wasn't him. The pain of that image was physical. No, he said, holding her hands before she could pull away. Don't leave me, Marina. Please. I know I messed everything up. I know I was an idiot. I know I don't deserve it, but don't leave me. Give me a chance to fix this. Marina looked at his hands enveloping hers. Robert, I don't want you to change because you're afraid of losing me. I want you to change because you truly want to be with me. I do, I swear I do, I just don't know how to start. Marina took a deep breath. Then let's start slowly, but I have conditions. Anything. First, therapy. Both of us together, and you alone too. Second, you'll have to learn to disconnect. No phone during meals, no work on weekends, no meetings after 8 at night. Third, we're going to start dating again. We're going to go out together, talk, get to know each other again. Robert nodded vigorously. Yes, all of it. I promise. And fourth, Marina continued, her voice growing firmer, if you make promises you can't keep, if you go back to old habits, if you make me feel invisible again, I'm leaving. And this time there will be no second chances. Robert swallowed hard, but nodded. Understood. They sat in silence for a few minutes, still holding hands, both emotionally exhausted by the most honest conversation they had had in years. Finally, Marina stood up. I'm going to sleep on the living room sofa, she said. Marina, you don't have to. Yes, I do. We have a lot of work ahead of us, Robert, and this isn't going to be resolved in one night. I need time to trust that you really want to change. Robert nodded, understanding. That night he stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the last few years of their marriage. For the first time in a long time, he had a real fear of losing something that truly mattered. The next morning, Robert woke up determined. Marina had already ordered breakfast in the room and was sitting on the balcony, looking at the sea. He approached hesitantly. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she replied, without looking at him. Marina, I want to start now, today. I don't want to wait until we get back to New York. She finally looked at him. What do you mean? Cancel everything I had planned today. The meetings, lunch with investors, everything. I want to spend the day with you. Just us. Marina studied him for a moment, looking for signs that he was being sincere or just reacting to the previous night's argument. Robert, you have a meeting with the Japanese consortium at 2 in the afternoon. It's about the new tower project. You said it was crucial. It was, but you're more crucial. For the first time since the party, Marina managed a small smile. Okay, what do you want to do? Robert realized he had no idea. When was the last time he had spent an entire day just enjoying his wife's company, without an agenda, without commitments, without goals beyond simply being together? I don't know, he admitted. What would you like to do? Marina laughed, and it was a genuine laugh. Robert Maxwell Armstrong, the man who plans every minute of his day 6 months in advance, doesn't know what to do on a free day with his own wife. Robert blushed. Pathetic, isn't it? It's a start, Marina said, standing up. Let's walk on the beach, and you're leaving your phone in the room. Robert hesitated for a fraction of a second, thinking about the emails he needed to answer, the calls he would miss. But then he looked at Marina, beautiful in the golden light of the Sydney morning, waiting to see if he was truly willing to change, and made a decision that would be the first of many in the coming months. He left his phone on the bed and followed his wife to the beach, to take the first step on a long journey back to each other. 2 months had passed since that night at the Grand Bondi Hotel, and Marina felt like she was getting to know Robert again, or perhaps for the first time. They were attending couples therapy twice a week with Dr. Felicity Shaw, a psychologist specializing in relationships who had an office in Greenwich Village. Robert also had individual sessions on Thursdays, something he had initially resisted, but now admitted was helping more than he expected. The change had not been linear or easy. Robert still struggled to disconnect from work, still instinctively grabbed his phone during dinner, still scheduled meetings at times that conflicted with their personal plans. But for the first time in years, he was genuinely trying. He had delegated more responsibilities to his partners, hired a CEO for daily operations, and established clear boundaries. No work after 8 at night, no work on Sundays, and at least 1 night a week dedicated exclusively to the two of them. Marina was cautiously optimistic. It was impossible not to notice the genuine effort Robert was making. He asked about the books she was reading, remembered her, important appointments, had even suggested she return to journalism if she wanted to. More importantly, he was touching her again, not just sexually, although their intimacy was also improving, but small gestures of affection she had forgotten existed. A hand on her waist as he passed her in the kitchen, a kiss on the top of her head when she was concentrating on reading, intertwined fingers when they watched a movie. It was a Tuesday morning when Marina received the message that would change everything. She was in her home office working on a freelance article about social inequality for a New York magazine when her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Marina, my name is Alexandra Stone. I need to talk to you about Robert. It's very important. Can you meet me this afternoon at Cafe Tortoni on Broadway? Please, it's about the beginning of your relationship. There are things you need to know." Marina read the message 3 times, her heart racing. Alexandra Stone. The name wasn't completely unfamiliar, but she couldn't remember where she knew it from. There was something unsettling about the urgency of the message, the specific way it mentioned the beginning of your relationship. What things did she need to know? She replied asking for more information, but received only, "It's better if we talk in person. I'll be there at 3 in the afternoon. It's about the truth Robert never told you." Marina spent the rest of the morning trying to concentrate on the article, but the words on the screen seemed blurred. What truth had Robert never told her? They were being more honest with each other than ever before, exploring dark corners of their personalities in therapy, talking about insecurities and fears they had never shared. What secret could be so big that a stranger needed to reveal it? At 2:30 in the afternoon, Marina was sitting in Cafe Tortoni, nervous, stirring a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The cafe was small and cozy, frequented mostly by intellectuals and artists from downtown New York, a place where she felt comfortable, but which seemed an odd choice for what promised to be a delicate conversation. When an elegant woman of approximately 40 entered the cafe, Marina instinctively knew it was Alexandra. She was tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a grey suit and expensive shoes. There was something familiar about her features, as if Marina had seen her before, perhaps in a photo. "Marina?" the woman asked, approaching the table. "Yes, Alexandra." "Thank you for coming," Alexandra said, sitting down. "I know this is strange, but believe me, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." Now that she had seen her up close, Marina was sure she knew that face. "Excuse me, but you look familiar. Have we met before?" Alexandra smiled bitterly. "Not directly. But you've seen my photo. I'm Robert's ex-fiancée." Marina felt as if the ground had moved beneath her feet. The ex-fiancée. Robert had briefly mentioned that he had been engaged before meeting her, but always changed the subject when Marina asked questions. He just said it had been a relationship that didn't work out, that they wanted different things in life, that it had ended amicably. "Robert never told me much about you two," Marina said carefully. "I'm sure he didn't," Alexandra replied. "Robert is very good at editing his own story. It's a skill he learned from the best." "I don't understand. Why do you want to talk to me?" Alexandra opened her designer bag and pulled out a black folder. "Because you have the right to know the truth about how your marriage began, and because, believe it or not, I like you. I always have. You know me. I know more about you than you imagine, Marina. I know you were born in Long Beach, Long Island, that your father was a steelworker and your mother a teacher. I know you graduated in journalism from NYU, that you worked at the New York Times before starting as a freelancer. I know you like contemporary art, that you're passionate about American music, that you speak French fluently, and that you always dreamed of writing a book." Marina felt invaded and confused. "How do you know all this?" "Because 5 years ago, my father handed me this folder with all that information about you, along with a very detailed plan of how Robert was supposed to approach you." The world seemed to stop. Marina looked at the black folder as if it were a snake ready to strike. "What are you talking about?" Alexandra took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice calm but laden with old sadness. "Robert didn't tell you that my father, Henry Stone, was his company's main investor 5 years ago, that Maxwell and Associates was on the verge of bankruptcy when you met, that Robert desperately needed to clean up his public reputation after some financial scandals?" Marina shook her head, trying to process the information. Robert never mentioned financial problems. When we met, he was already successful. Superficially, yes, but the behind the scenes was very different. Alexandra opened the folder and began to pull out documents. Robert had made some very bad investments, had gotten involved with questionable people, and the company was deeply in debt. Furthermore, there were rumors in the financial press about dubious practices. My father saw an opportunity. What opportunity? Robert was desperate. He needed capital immediately, and he also needed to clean up his image. My father proposed a deal. He would save the company financially, but Robert would have to do something in return. Alexandra slid a document across the table. Break up with me and marry someone who would completely change public perception of him. Marina looked at the document and saw her own photo stapled to a page full of personal information. It was like a complete dossier on her life, including details she barely remembered sharing with anyone. Why me? Because you were perfect, Alexandra said, a bitter irony in her voice. A respected investigative journalist from humble origins, known for exposing corruption. If Robert Maxwell Armstrong married Marina Sterling, the same journalist who had brought down corrupt politicians, it would completely change the narrative about him. He would stop being the suspicious businessman and become the man who won over the woman of integrity. Marina felt nauseous. Are you telling me Robert pretended to fall in love with me? He didn't pretend, Alexandra quickly corrected. That's the most complicated part of this whole story. The plan was for him to get close to you, gain your trust, date for a while to improve his image, and then break up naturally. My father and I would get back together and everyone would win. But Robert fell in love for real, and completely. Alexandra looked at her own hands. He came to me 3 months after he started dating you, desperate, saying he couldn't go on with the plan, that you were the most incredible woman he had ever met, that he felt guilty for every lie, for every fabricated date, for every manipulated moment. Marina vaguely remembered the first few months with Robert, how he had appeared in her life so conveniently, how he always seemed to be in the right places at the right times, how he had been interested in her work in a way that had positively surprised her at the time. Were the dates planned? All of them, Alexandra confirmed. The coffee shop in Chinatown where you met, Robert knew you went there every Tuesday morning because he had a source who worked at the Japanese restaurant next door. The exhibition at MoMA where he casually ran into you, he had hired someone to find out your cultural agenda. The first 3 months of your relationship were carefully orchestrated. Marina felt dizzy. All those precious memories, moments she had treasured of how they met and fell in love, were a lie. Or at least they had started as a lie. And then? Then Robert rebelled against the plan. He said he couldn't pretend anymore, that he had truly fallen in love and wanted to be with you forever. My father was furious, threatened to withdraw the investment, but Robert chose to take the risk. He sold everything he could sell, took out personal loans, did everything not to depend on my father's money anymore. And you? I was publicly humiliated. The society press had announced our engagement. Everyone expected a fairy tale wedding between 2 of New York's wealthiest families, and suddenly Robert dumped me for a journalist no one in our social class knew. Alexandra's voice hardened. My father never forgave him, and it took me years to get over it. Marina looked again at the documents scattered on the table. There were bank statements showing payments made to private investigation firms, emails exchanged between Robert and people she didn't know, discussing approach strategies. There were even photos of her taken without her knowledge, in places she frequented, with notes about her habits and preferences. Why are you telling me this now? Marina asked, her voice almost a whisper. Because my father died last month, Alexandra said simply. And I found all these documents in his office, because I always knew that one day Robert should have told you the truth, and he never had the courage, and because I saw you two together a few times over the last few years, at social events, in restaurants, and I realized something that made me even angrier. Robert truly loves you, more than he ever loved me, more than I thought he was capable of loving anyone. And that made me furious, because it meant he had chosen you not just out of convenience but out of true love. Marina felt tears burning her eyes. And now you want revenge. No, Alexandra said, surprising her. Now I want justice. You deserve to know the truth about the man who married you. You deserve to decide if you can live with someone who lied about something so fundamental. And you deserve a chance to choose whether you want to continue a relationship that began with a lie. Marina looked at all the documents again. 5 years of marriage, 2 months of therapy, weeks of hard work to rebuild trust, and now this. Robert had lied about something far greater than she had ever imagined. He hadn't just emotionally distanced himself, he had built the very foundation of their relationship on a charade. "Is there anything else I should know?" Marina asked. "Only this." Alexandra pulled another paper from the folder. "Robert never told you about the threats my father made when he decided to stay with you forever." "What threats?" "My father said he would destroy Robert's career and yours too if he didn't return to the original plan. He said he had enough contacts in the media to ruin both your reputations. Robert chose to protect you by keeping all of this a secret." Marina stood up abruptly, feeling like she needed air. "I need to go." "Marina, wait." Alexandra gently held her arm. "I know this is devastating, but you need to understand one thing. Regardless of how it started, the love Robert feels for you is real. I saw it in his eyes. I saw how he transformed because of you. That doesn't change the fact that our entire story is a lie," Marina replied, pulling away. "It's not a lie," Alexandra insisted. "It's a complicated story that started with wrong intentions, but that became something real and true." Marina grabbed her bag, leaving the documents on the table. "Thank you for telling me, even if I'd rather never have known." She left the cafe in a state of shock, walking aimlessly through the busy streets of downtown New York. Everything she believed about her relationship with Robert, all the memories she considered sacred, had been contaminated by Alexandra's revelation. How was it possible that the man who was trying so hard to win back her love was the same man who had lied about something so fundamental? When she arrived home, Robert had not yet returned from work. Marina sat in the living room, looking at their wedding photos hanging on the wall, at the souvenirs from their trips together, at all the physical evidence of a shared life that now seemed built on quicksand. Robert arrived at 7 in the evening, carrying flowers, and with the smile she had learned to love again in recent weeks. "Hi, darling. How was your day?" he asked, kissing her forehead in the affectionate way he had recently resumed. Marina looked at him and saw, for the first time, a stranger. "Robert, we need to talk." Something in her tone made Robert freeze. "Did something happen?" "This afternoon I met with Alexandra Stone." The color drained from Robert's face. The flowers fell from his hand, scattering across the marble floor of the living room. He sat heavily on the sofa, as if his legs could no longer support him. "Marina, is it true?" she asked, her voice surprisingly calm. "Everything she told me is true." Robert closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Marina saw in them the confirmation she didn't want to see. "Yes," he whispered, "it's true." And with that simple word, Marina's carefully reconstructed world collapsed once more. The silence that followed Robert's confession echoed through the room like a scream. Marina stared at him, searching for some sign that she had misunderstood, that there was still an explanation that could salvage what was left of the trust between them. But Robert's eyes confirmed everything: the humiliation, the betrayal, the discovery that their love story had been a carefully planned construct. "Please let me explain," Robert said, his voice broken. "Explain what?" Marina retorted, standing up abruptly. "How do you explain that you lied about everything? That our first meeting was a sham? That you investigated me as if I were a business target?" "It wasn't like that, Marina. In the beginning, yes. But when I really got to know you, when you really got to know me," she interrupted him, her voice rising. "Robert, you spied on me for months before approaching me. You knew everything about me before you even pretended you'd seen me for the first time in that coffee shop." Robert stood up and tried to approach, but Marina instinctively recoiled. "Marina, I know how terrible this sounds, but you need to understand the context. I was desperate. The company was failing. I was being investigated by the IRS. There were rumors in the press that could ruin me. When Alexandra's father proposed the plan, I thought it was my only chance to survive. And I was just a tool to clean up your reputation. In the beginning, yes, Robert admitted, and each word seemed forcibly torn from his throat. But everything changed when I started talking to you for real, when I discovered who you truly were, your intelligence, your passion for justice, your unique way of seeing the world. I fell in love, Marina, completely and irrevocably. But you kept lying, Marina pointed out, tears finally beginning to stream. For 5 years, Robert, 5 years of marriage, and you never had the courage to tell me the truth, because I knew you would react exactly like this. I knew I would lose. You, if you knew how it all started. And you thought you had the right to take that choice away from me, to decide for me whether I could or could not forgive, to live with me based on a lie? Robert ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of desperation Marina knew well. I tried to tell you many times, especially after we got married, but the more time passed, the harder it became. How was I supposed to tell the woman I love that our relationship started with a lie? By telling the truth, Marina shouted. By trusting me. By giving me credit for having enough discernment to decide what to do with that information. Marina, please. Don't touch me. She pulled away when Robert tried to hold her hand. Not now. I need to think. I can't be here now. Marina ran to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase and started throwing clothes into it without much thought. Robert followed her, standing in the doorway, watching her as if he were watching his life crumble in slow motion. Where are you going? He asked. To my sister's apartment in Brooklyn Heights. I need space, Robert. I need to process this. For how long? Marina stopped packing and stared at him. I don't know. Maybe forever. She saw Robert swallow hard, saw the panic setting in his eyes, but she also saw something different. Unlike their last argument, he wasn't trying to argue, wasn't trying to control her or convince her to stay. He was just accepting. I will respect your space, he said finally. But Marina, please remember one thing. Everything I felt for you, everything I lived with you over the last 5 years was real. My love for you is the truest thing in my life. Marina closed the suitcase forcefully. Maybe it is, but it was built on a lie, and now I don't know what's real and what's manipulation anymore. She walked past Robert without looking at him and left, leaving behind 5 years of marriage and 2 months of carefully rebuilt hope. Her sister Pauline's apartment was small and cozy, the complete opposite of the luxurious penthouse Marina had called home for the past few years. Pauline, who worked as a literature teacher at a private school, received Marina without asking questions, simply hugging her as she sobbed convulsively on the living room sofa. Do you want to talk about it? Pauline asked after Marina had calmed down a bit. He lied about everything, Pauline. Our entire story is a sham. Marina told her sister everything, from the party in Sydney to the meeting with Alexandra. Pauline listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details, but mostly just offering supportive presence. My goodness, Mari. That's much worse than just being ignored. It's a complete violation of your autonomy. I feel so stupid, Marina said, wiping her eyes. How did I not notice? How did I not suspect that so many coincidences were impossible? Because you're an honest person who trusts the people you love, Pauline gently replied. You couldn't have imagined something like this because you would never do something like this. For the next 3 weeks, Marina lived in a kind of emotional limbo. She woke up every morning hoping the pain would lessen, that the anger would pass, that she could see a path to forgiveness. But with each passing day, the betrayal seemed greater, deeper, more devastating. Robert completely respected her space. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at Pauline's apartment. The only communication between them was through lawyers for practical matters related to their joint finances. Marina learned through Pauline, who had mutual friends with Robert, that he had cancelled all work commitments and was visibly shaken, but this did not alleviate her pain. What hurt her most was the realization that she didn't truly know the man she had shared 5 years of her life with. Was the Robert who had fallen in love in the first few months real? Was the Robert who had made love to her on their honeymoon real? Was the Robert who had cried when she had a miscarriage in their second year of marriage real? Which parts of him were genuine and which were a performance? It was a Thursday morning when Marina woke up feeling strange. She had spent the previous night vomiting, attributing the malaise to emotional stress and irregular eating over the past few weeks. But when she got out of her sister's bed and intense dizziness made her lean against the wall, Pauline insisted they go to the doctor. "It's just stress, Pauline. I'm not eating right, I'm not sleeping. Marie, you've been pale for days and this dizziness isn't normal. Let's go to the hospital now." At Mount Sinai Hospital, Marina underwent a battery of tests. The doctor, a 50-year-old man with a paternal demeanor, returned with the results and a smile that Marina couldn't interpret. "Marina, there are two pieces of news, one concerning and one that might be a surprise." Marina's heart pounded. "Concerning how?" "You're showing signs of extreme exhaustion. Your blood pressure is altered, you're dehydrated, and your cortisol levels indicate your body is in a state of chronic stress. You need to rest, eat better, and perhaps consider psychological support to deal with what's causing this stress." Marina nodded. That was no surprise. "And the other news?" The doctor smiled. "You're pregnant. Approximately 8 weeks." The world stopped. Marina looked at the doctor as if he had spoken a foreign language. Pregnant. 8 weeks. That meant she had gotten pregnant right after the trip to Sydney, in the first weeks when she and Robert were trying to rebuild their marriage. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Absolutely. Blood tests confirm it. Congratulations." Pauline held Marina's hand, who was in a state of shock. Pregnant, with the child of a man who had lied about the fundamental basis of their relationship, with the child of a man she didn't know if she loved or hated. "Marina, you need to tell Robert," Pauline said as they left the hospital. "I can't," Marina replied automatically. "Not yet. I need to process this first. Marie, regardless of the problems between you two, he has a right to know he's going to be a father." Marina spent the next 24 hours in a state of near emotional paralysis. Pregnant. After years of trying to conceive, especially after the miscarriage that had devastated them both, now that her marriage was crumbling, now that she didn't even know if she wanted to remain married, she was pregnant. The irony was cruel. For years, she and Robert had tried to have children. They had consulted specialists, undergone tests, tried different treatments. The miscarriage had been a devastating moment that temporarily brought them closer, but which also intensified the pressure on their relationship. And now, when everything was destroyed, the pregnancy had finally happened. On Friday night, Marina was alone in Pauline's apartment when she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. The pain was intense, unlike anything she had ever felt, and was accompanied by a feeling of weakness that made her cling to the arm of the sofa. "Pauline!" she cried, but then remembered her sister had gone out to dinner with friends. The pain intensified, radiating through her back and legs. Marina managed to grab her phone and dialed 911. As she waited for the ambulance, a single question hammered in her mind. If something happened to the baby, Robert would never know it had existed. It was that realization that made her, in a moment of clarity amidst the pain, dial his number. Robert answered on the first ring. "Marina?" "Robert," she managed to say between gasping breaths. I need you. Mount Sinai Hospital. Please." "What happened? I'm coming now." "Robert," she said before he hung up, "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only 2 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice laden with panic and determination. Robert arrived at the hospital even before the ambulance carrying Marina. When the paramedics brought her in on the stretcher, he was there holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, completely different from the distant man she had known for much of their marriage. "It's going to be okay," he repeated, more to himself than to her. "It's going to be okay, darling." During the 6 hours Marina was under observation in the emergency room, Robert did not leave her side once. When the doctors said that both she and the baby were fine, that it had just been an episode of extreme stress, Robert cried tears of relief in a way Marina had never seen. "Marina," he said when they were finally alone in the room, "you're pregnant." "I am." "How far along?" 8 weeks. It was right after Sydney. Robert sat in the chair beside the bed, looking at her as if he were seeing a miracle. "We're going to have a baby." "Robert," Marina said calmly, "this doesn't change anything between us." She saw something break in his eyes, but she also saw determination. "I know," he said, "but it changes everything in me." "What do you mean?" Robert stood up and walked to the hospital window, looking at the illuminated New York City. When he turned around again, there was a resolution on his face that Marina had never seen before. "Marina, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I broke your trust in a way that might be irreparable. But now we're going to have a child, and I want that child to have the father he deserves. Not the man I was, but the man I can become." "Robert, let me finish, please." He walked back to the bed. "I'm going to make changes, real changes, not empty promises like I made before. I'm going to sell the company." Marina looked at him in surprise. "What?" "I'm going to sell my stake in Maxwell and Associates. I'm going to pay off all outstanding debts. I'm going to get rid of all the commitments that turned me into the man who lied to you. And I'm going to start over." "Robert, you're in shock. You don't need to make drastic decisions now." "It's not a drastic decision," he said firmly. "It's the only decision that makes sense. I built an empire on lies and manipulation. Now I want to build a life on truth and love. Even if you never forgive me, even if you decide you don't want to stay with me, I want to be the man our child can admire." Marina looked at Robert and saw something she hadn't seen in years: absolute authenticity. There was no calculation in his words, no strategy. There was just a man confronted with the possibility of being a father and making decisions she never imagined he would be capable of making. "What if I decide I want a divorce?" Robert took a deep breath. "Then I will respect your decision. But I will fight every day to be the best father possible for our child, and to show you that the man who truly fell in love with you still exists." That night in the hospital, something fundamental changed between them. It wasn't forgiveness. Marina was still too hurt for that. It wasn't reconciliation. There was still too much work to be done. But it was the beginning of something new. The possibility that true love could grow from the ashes of lies, that truth could be the foundation of a relationship that had begun with deception. Robert spent the night at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Marina's bed. And when she woke up the next morning and saw him there, his jacket rumpled and an expression of fierce protection on his face, she knew that the man who had lied to win her was truly dead. What remained was to discover if the man who was being born in his place deserved a second chance. The months that followed were the strangest and most transformative of Marina's life. She had decided to return home, not because she had completely forgiven Robert, but because carrying a child required stability, and she wanted to process her feelings in the environment she knew. But the rules were clear. Robert slept in the guest room. They lived as civilized housemates, and he would have to prove day after day that the change he had promised in the hospital was real. Robert kept every promise he had made. In the first week after Marina's discharge, he informed his partners of his decision to sell his stake in the company. The news caused an earthquake in the New York business world. Robert Maxwell Armstrong, at 35, at the peak of financial success, selling everything to focus on family, as he told the press. "Are you sure about this?" Marina asked one morning, seeing him on the phone with lawyers organizing the sale. "This company has been your life for 15 years. "It was my life," Robert corrected, hanging up the phone. "Now you too are my life." Marina instinctively touched her belly, where at 4 months gestation, a small bump was already visible. They had discovered at the last ultrasound that the baby was a girl, information that had moved Robert to tears in front of the doctor. Robert's transformation was not just financial. He began attending individual therapy 3 times a week, something Marina had insisted on as a non-negotiable condition. During dinner, the only times they conversed extensively, He shared insights he was discovering about himself. "Dr. Shaw made me realize that I always built my identity around external success," he said one Tuesday in June. "Since childhood, I believed that my value as a person depended on what I could achieve, how much money I earned, how much power I accumulated. And now? Now I'm trying to discover who Robert is when he's not a CEO of anything, when he doesn't have meetings to dominate, when he doesn't need to impress anyone." It was a painful journey to witness. Marina saw Robert struggling with a deep identity crisis, questioning not only his professional choices, but the entire structure of values upon which he had built his adult life. There were nights when she heard him walking around the house, clearly sleepless, battling demons he had ignored for decades. But there were tangible changes too. Robert started cooking, terribly at first, but with fierce determination to learn. He enrolled in cooking classes, bought books, watched YouTube videos. The first few weeks were a disaster of burnt pans and practically inedible dishes, but Marina couldn't deny that there was something touching in seeing him try so hard to make something simple that might please her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one afternoon, finding him attempting to make a mushroom risotto after discovering she had a craving for that specific food. "Because for the past 5 years you cooked for me almost every night, and I never reciprocated. Because I want to take care of you, especially now that you're pregnant. And because it's a normal thing that normal people do for each other." "Normal people," Robert smiled sadly. "I realize now that I spent so much time trying to be extraordinary that I forgot how to be ordinary, how to be a regular husband who takes care of the woman he loves." The sale of the company took 3 months to finalize. Robert sold his stake for an amount that would guarantee financial comfort for the rest of their lives, but which represented only a fraction of what the company was worth when he actively managed it. He paid off all outstanding debts, including some Marina didn't even know existed, and settled loans he had taken out years earlier, to free himself from dependence on Alexandra's father's money. "What are you going to do now?" Marina asked on the day the sale was finalized. "I don't know yet," Robert replied honestly. "Maybe something with social projects, something that makes a real difference, not just generates profit." It was then that Marina saw another side of Robert she didn't know. Free from the constant pressure to generate financial results, he began to take an interest in causes he had never considered. He started volunteering at a non-profit organization that supported single mothers in vulnerable social situations, using his business skills to help the organization be more efficient and impactful. "It's strange," he commented one night, returning from downtown New York where the NGO was located. "I spent 15 years moving millions of dollars to make more millions of dollars. Today I helped a 20-year-old woman get childcare for her son while she finishes high school, and I feel more fulfilled than I did closing any deal." Marina observed these changes with a mixture of hope and cautious skepticism. It was hard to believe that the man who had lied so fundamentally about the origins of their relationship could truly transform so drastically, but there were moments when she saw him assembling their daughter's crib with obsessive dedication, when she found him reading books on parenthood, when she heard him talking to her belly before bed, that she felt that maybe, just maybe, true love could flourish from the ashes of lies. The 6th month of pregnancy brought an unexpected complication. During a routine examination, the doctor detected signs of preeclampsia, a condition that could be dangerous for both Marina and the baby. She would need absolute bed rest and constant monitoring. "I'll take care of you," Robert said immediately when they learned of the diagnosis. "Robert, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're carrying our daughter. Let me take care of both of you." Over the following weeks, Robert became a nurse, personal chef, reading companion, and anything else Marina needed. He cancelled all commitments, including his work at the NGO, to be entirely available. He brought her breakfast in bed, read to her in the afternoons, massaged her swollen feet, and talked to her belly every night, telling their daughter how eagerly they awaited her. "She already recognizes your voice," Marina commented one afternoon, when the baby kicked vigorously in response to Robert's voice. "She knows. Daddy loves her very much," Robert replied, gently kissing Marina's belly. It was during these weeks of intensive care that something fundamental changed in Marina's heart. She began to see Robert not through the lens of past betrayal, but through his present actions. The man who woke up at 3 in the morning to help her when she couldn't find a comfortable sleeping position. The man who cried reading articles about child development because he wanted to be the best father possible. The man who had given up everything that defined him to rebuild himself as someone worthy of the family he was forming. "Robert," she said one rainy August afternoon as he organized the medications she needed to take, "I want you to come back to our bedroom." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her in surprise. "Marina, are you sure?" "Not sexually," she quickly clarified, blushing. I don't know if I could yet, but I want you to sleep beside me. I want you to be nearby if I need anything during the night." That night, for the first time in 5 months, Robert slept in the bed beside Marina. They didn't touch, beyond an affectionate good-night kiss, but there was an intimacy in the simple shared presence that both had forgotten existed. Labor began on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks before the due date. Marina woke up with regular contractions and a mixture of excitement and panic. Robert remained calm, or at least appeared to, grabbed the bag that had been ready for weeks, and calmly drove Marina to the hospital. "It's all right, darling," he repeated, holding her hand in the car. "Our daughter is eager to meet Mommy." Labor was long and difficult, 15 hours of intense contractions, moments of panic when the baby's heart rate became irregular, medical decisions that needed to be made quickly. Throughout the process, Robert was by Marina's side, holding her hand, wiping her sweat, whispering words of encouragement, whimpering along with her when the pain became unbearable. "I can't take it anymore," Marina cried during a particularly intense contraction. "You can do it," Robert said, looking directly into her eyes. "You are the strongest woman I know. Our daughter is almost here." When Sophie Armstrong finally arrived, at 6 in the morning on a sunny Friday in September, Robert cried as Marina had never seen a man cry. It wasn't a silent or restrained cry. It was a deep, uncontrolled sob of pure emotion. "She's perfect," he managed to say between tears when the nurse placed Sophie in his arms. "She is absolutely perfect." Marina, exhausted but radiant, watched the man who had lied to win her holding their daughter as if she were made of crystal. She saw the pure, unconditional love in his eyes, saw the complete transformation of who he was. At that moment, in the delivery room illuminated by the New York morning, Marina knew with certainty that she had completely forgiven Robert. "I love you," she said, reaching out to touch his face. Robert looked at her in surprise. "Marina, I love you," she repeated. "Not the man you were, but the man you became. The father our daughter will have. The man who chose to give up everything to rebuild our family." Robert gently kissed her forehead, still holding Sophie. "I love you more than any words can express, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that love." The first few months with Sophie were a chaotic mix of sleepless nights, endless diapers, and a happiness neither of them had imagined possible. Robert proved to be a dedicated and present father, waking up for late-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in a soft voice Marina had never known he had. "You're a natural father," Marina commented one afternoon, watching Robert play with Sophie, who was now 4 months old and beginning to smile responsively. "I want to be for her everything my father never was for me," Robert replied. Present, affectionate, interested in her life, proud of who she is, not just what she achieves. It was during this period that Robert found his new calling. Using his business experience and his new passion for social causes, he founded a non-profit organization focused on supporting young families in underprivileged communities. The organization offered childcare, vocational courses for parents, and microcredit for women who wanted to start small businesses. "It's ironic," he commented one night, as he worked on his laptop at the kitchen table after Sophie had fallen asleep. "I spent 15 years accumulating wealth, and now that I'm distributing wealth, I feel richer than I ever have." Marina, who had returned to journalism writing freelance articles about motherhood and social issues, watched Robert work and felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. They had become a real family, built on truth, mutual dedication, and genuine love. When Sophie turned 1, they made a decision that surprised friends and family. They sold the luxurious penthouse in Greenwich Village and bought a simple house in a residential neighborhood in Park Slope. The house had a backyard, close neighbors, and the kind of community life neither of them had experienced when they were rich. "Do you miss it?" Marina asked one afternoon, while Robert was assembling a swing in the backyard for Sophie. "The life we had before?" Robert stopped working and looked around. Sophie was playing in the grass. Marina was 6 months pregnant with their second child, and the house was filled with the normal sounds of a happy family. "Never," he replied without hesitation. "That life was beautiful on the outside and empty on the inside. This life is real." The second pregnancy had been a welcome surprise. When Marina discovered she was expecting again 2 years after Sophie's birth, both cried with happiness. This time there was no anxiety, no unresolved lies, no shadows of the past. There was only a couple who had been through fire and emerged stronger, truer, more connected. "What shall we name this one?" Robert asked one afternoon, his hands on Marina's belly while Sophie slept in his lap. "If it's a boy, Peter. If it's a girl, Claire," Marina replied. "Simple names, honest names." "Names that match our honest life," Robert agreed. On a Sunday afternoon, while Robert played with Sophie on Long Beach, Long Island, they had started taking simple weekend trips instead of the extravagant ones before. Marina watched the man who had truly become her husband. He ran after their 2-year-old daughter, who laughed uncontrollably, completely present in the moment, completely happy. "Are you okay?" he asked, coming to sit beside her on the sand, Sophie clinging to his neck. "I'm perfect," Marina replied, and it was the purest truth. They kissed softly, with Sophie between them, the sun setting over the ocean, and Marina thought of the impossible journey that had led them there. From the luxurious apartment, where she felt invisible, to this simple beach, where she felt completely seen and loved. From the lie that had almost destroyed everything, to the truth that had saved everything. "Marina," Robert said, adjusting Sophie in his lap, "thank you." "For what?" "For giving me the chance to become the man I always should have been. For believing that people can change. For building a real family with me." Marina looked at the man who had lost fortunes but found himself, at the daughter who had united them in a way money never could, at the simple and true life they had built together. "Thank you," she replied, "for proving that true love can grow even from the most painful lies." As they walked back to the car, Sophie asleep in her father's arms, the sun disappearing on the horizon, and the baby gently stirring in Marina's belly, they knew they had found something that could not be bought, manipulated, or forged. They had found real love, built on truth, tempered by difficulty, and strengthened by the daily choice to choose each other, despite all imperfections, all scars, all past mistakes. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was a real story, of real people who had decided that love is worth fighting for even when, especially when, it seems impossible. And as they drove back home through the familiar streets of New York, family complete, life simple, hearts at peace, Marina knew that some of the best love stories are those that begin at the end, when all seems lost, and two people decide to write a new beginning together.